When Wyatt Carrington tasted the apple pie cooling on his kitchen windowsill, he nearly choked. Not from the flaky crust or cinnamon-sweet filling, but from the impossible truth that it tasted exactly like his dead wife's. The Wyoming wind had been howling for 3 days straight, rattling the shutters of the Carrington Ranch like bones in a dried-up creek bed. Wyatt stood in his kitchen doorway, hat still dripping from the October rain, staring at the woman who'd answered his newspaper advertisement for a cook. She moved around his kitchen with the easy grace of someone who belonged there, her dark hair escaping its pins as she bent over the wood-burning stove. "Name's Violet Drake," she'd said when she arrived that morning, her carpet bag clutched in one hand and a sleeping child balanced on her hip. "I can cook, clean, and keep house. This here's my daughter, Sadie." The little girl had amber eyes that reminded Wyatt of autumn leaves, and she watched him with the careful wariness of someone who'd learned too young that the world could be cruel. Now, 6 hours later, his kitchen smelled like home for the first time in 2 years. Since Clara died, the scent hit him in waves. Yeast and butter, cinnamon and vanilla, the earthy richness of beef simmering with herbs he couldn't name. It was as if someone had opened a door to the past and invited all his memories to dinner. Wyatt's stomach clenched, not from hunger, but from something deeper, more dangerous. "Hope, you settling all right?" Wyatt asked, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by grief that still ambushed him at unexpected moments. "Yes, sir." Violet turned from the stove, wiping her hands on the apron. Clara's apron, he realized with a jolt. The faded blue cotton with tiny white flowers that his wife had worn every Sunday. "Found everything I needed. Hope you don't mind, but little Sadie was getting fussy, so I made her some milk toast. She's napping upstairs now." The casual way she mentioned his daughter's room made something twist in Wyatt's chest. No one had been in that room since Clara died. He'd locked the door and tried to forget it existed, along with the pink curtains Clara had sewn by hand and the wooden toys he'd carved during the long winter evenings when his wife's belly grew round with promise. "That's fine," he managed. "Hungry, starving," Violet admitted, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she smiled. It transformed her face completely, softening the sharp angles worry had carved around her eyes. "Been traveling for near a week. Nothing but hardtack and jerky." Wyatt pulled out a chair at the wooden table Clara had insisted on ordering from back east. The oak surface bore the scars of their life together, a burn mark where she'd set a hot pot down in her excitement to tell him about the baby, knife. Scratches from years of preparing meals with love instead of caution. Every mark told a story, and seeing Violet's hand smooth across the familiar would felt like watching someone else's life unfold in his kitchen. "Where you coming from?" he asked, settling into his usual chair, the one that faced the window, so he could watch the horizon while they ate. "Missouri." Violet set a plate before him. His plate, the one with the chip on the rim that Clara had always saved for him. "My husband died in a mining accident 6 months ago. Couldn't make ends meet on my own." She didn't elaborate, but Wyatt heard the weight of untold stories in her voice. The way she moved around his kitchen, checking the bread in the oven, stirring something that smelled like heaven in a cast-iron pot, told him she was a woman accustomed to making do with what she had. Her dress was patched but clean, her boots worn but polished. Pride he recognized, the same fierce pride Clara had carried when she'd first arrived as a mail-order bride, determined to prove she could make a life in this harsh country. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and meant it. Grief recognized grief, he'd learned. It was a language spoken in the spaces between words, in the way someone's shoulders carried invisible weight. "Thank you." Violet ladled stew into his bowl, and the scent that rose with the steam made Wyatt's breath catch. Beef and potatoes, carrots and onions, but seasoned with something he couldn't name. Something that tasted like memory. He took a bite, and the world shifted sideways. Clara had made this exact stew every Sunday for the first 3 years of their marriage. She'd learned the recipe from her grandmother, she'd said, and had spent hours teaching Wyatt the precise blend of herbs that made it special. After she died, he tried to recreate it dozens of times, but it never tasted right. Never tasted like home. "This is..." He stopped, fork halfway to his mouth. "How did you know to add sage?" Violet looked up from her own bowl, startled. "Oh, it just seemed right. I always add sage to beef stew." Learned it from my grandmother. She paused, studying his face with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. Something wrong? No. The word came out too fast, too sharp. It's good. Real good. But as they ate in companionable silence, Wyatt's mind raced. The stew, the way she'd known exactly where to find the good plates in the hutch, how she'd instinctively used Clara's apron, the fact that she'd somehow unlocked his daughter's room without asking for the key. It was like watching a ghost move. Through his house, familiar and impossible, the bread she'd baked was golden brown perfection, crusty on the outside and soft within. Clara's recipe, he was certain, though he'd never shared it with anyone. The way Violet buttered it, spreading the cream thick at the edges just like his wife used to do, made his chest tight with emotions he'd buried deep. After dinner, Violet insisted on washing the dishes while Wyatt sat by the fire, pretending to read the newspaper. Really, he was watching her move around his kitchen, noting how she dried the plates in the same order Clara always had, largest to smallest, stacked just so in the cupboard. She hummed softly under her breath while she worked, a melody he didn't recognize but somehow felt in his bones. Mr. Carrington? Violet appeared in the doorway, backlit by the golden kitchen light. I put some coffee on. Would you like a cup? Please. He folded the newspaper, realizing he hadn't absorbed a single word. And it's Wyatt. No need for formality. She poured 2 cups and settled into the chair across from him. Clara's chair, he realized with a start. The firelight caught the copper threads in her dark hair, and for a moment, in his peripheral vision, she looked so much like. Thank you for taking us in, she said quietly. I know it's not easy, having strangers in your home. House has been too quiet, Wyatt admitted. Good to hear life in it again. They sat in comfortable silence, and for the first time in months, Wyatt felt something like peace settling into his bones. The storm outside seemed to be calming, the winds howled diminishing to a whisper. Through the window, he could see the first stars appearing between the racing clouds. Wyatt. Violet's voice was soft, hesitant. I hope you don't mind me asking, but was your wife a cook? The question hit him like a physical blow. His coffee cup trembled in his hands. Why do you ask? Just the way you looked at the stew. Like you'd tasted it before. Like it brought back memories. He stared into his coffee, seeing Clara's face reflected in the dark surface. Her laugh, her smile, the way she'd dance around the kitchen when she thought. No one was watching. She was. Clara could make magic with flour and salt. I'm sorry, Violet said quickly. I shouldn't have. No, it's all right. He looked up, meeting her eyes. They were kind eyes, he realized. Soft and understanding. She died 2 years ago. Fever took her fast. One day she was humming over breakfast. The next, that's hard. Violet's voice carried the weight of shared understanding. Losing someone you love, it changes everything. Makes you question what's real and what's just wishful thinking. Yeah. Wyatt drained his coffee cup, using the motion to hide the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. It does. But as he prepared to bid her goodnight, one thought echoed in his mind like a warning bell. How could a stranger cook exactly like his dead wife? How could she know things about his kitchen, his home, his life that he'd never told her? And why did the apple pie on his windowsill smell exactly like the one Clara used to make for his birthday? The next morning arrived with the kind of crystal clear sky that made a man forget winter was coming. Wyatt woke to the sound of humming drifting up from the kitchen below, a low, melodious tune that seemed to wrap around his dreams and pull him gently into consciousness. For a moment, caught between sleep and waking, he forgot that Clara was gone. Then reality crashed back like a bucket of cold creek water that he dressed quickly, boots echoing on the wooden stairs as he descended to find Violet already at work. She stood at the stove, her back to him, stirring something in a large pot, while little Sadie sat at the table, carefully spooning porridge into her mouth. The child looked up when he entered, those amber eyes assessing him with the gravity of someone far older than her 4 years. Morning, Mr. Wyatt, she said solemnly, then returned to her breakfast with the focused attention of a scholar. Morning, sweetheart. The endearment slipped out before he could stop it, and he saw Violet's shoulders tense slightly at the word. Sleep well? Yes, sir. Mama made the room all cozy. It smells like roses. Wyatt's blood chilled. Clara had sewn sachets of dried roses into the curtains of what was supposed to be their daughter's room. He'd never told Violet about that. and the sachets had been hidden in the fabric's folds for 2 years. How could a 4-year-old smell something that faint? Coffee's ready, Violet said, turning with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And I made flapjacks. Hope that's all right. She set a plate before him, and the sight made his heart skip. Golden brown pancakes, perfectly round, with a pat of butter melting in the center. Clara's recipe, down to the slightly crispy edges and the way they were stacked just so. But it was the small pitcher of maple syrup beside the plate that made his hands shake. Where did you find that? He asked, pointing to the delicate ceramic vessel painted with tiny bluebirds. In the pantry, behind the flour sack. Violet poured herself coffee, avoiding his eyes. It's beautiful. Looks like it was made by someone who loved whoever they made it for. Clara had painted that syrup pitcher during their first winter together, when the snow had been too deep for weeks, and she'd needed something to keep her hands busy. She'd worked on it every evening by lamplight, tongue poking out in concentration, determined to make something beautiful for their table. It was, Wyatt said quietly, cutting into the flapjacks. They were perfect, light and fluffy, with just a hint of vanilla. Exactly like Clara's. Mama makes the best flapjacks in the whole world, Sadie announced, syrup glistening on her chin. She knows all the secret ingredients. Secret ingredients. Wyatt looked at Violet, who was suddenly very interested in her coffee cup. Oh, just little things. A pinch of this, a dash of that. She stood abruptly, moving to the sink. Nothing special. But Wyatt was beginning to think everything about Violet Drake was special. Impossibly, inexplicably special. After breakfast, he showed her around the ranch. The barn needed mucking, the chicken coop required mending, and the vegetable garden was overrun with weeds. Clara had tended that garden with the devotion of a mother, coaxing life from the stubborn Wyoming soil until it flourished with enough vegetables to last the winter. Shame to let it go to waste, Violet murmured, kneeling beside a neglected tomato plant. Her fingers moved through the tangled vines with practiced ease, identifying what could be saved and what was beyond hope. This soil's good, just needs someone who cares about it. Clara planted it, Wyatt said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. Haven't had the heart to tend it since. She had good instincts. Violet's voice was gentle as she examined a late-blooming rose bush at the garden's edge. These roses are heritage variety. Takes real knowledge to grow them at this altitude. Wyatt stared at her. How do you know that? Violet paused, her hand still on the thorny stem. I've always been drawn to growing things. My grandmother taught me about plants, soil, seasons. Some knowledge just stays with you. She moved through the garden like she belonged there, pointing out herbs Wyatt hadn't even known Clara had planted. Lavender for headaches, chamomile for peaceful sleep, sage for protection. Her knowledge was intimate, specific, as if she'd planted every seed herself. Violet, he said slowly, what was your grandmother's name? She went very still, her back to him. Why do you ask? Just curious. You mention her a lot. Clara, she said quietly. Her name was Clara. The world tilted. Wyatt felt as if he'd been punched in the gut by an invisible fist. Clara what? Clara Rose. Violet stood, brushing dirt from her hands without meeting his eyes. She was special. Knew things about healing, about making a home. Said knowledge like that should be passed down, mother to daughter, so it never gets lost. Rose was Clara's maiden name, Wyatt said, his voice barely above a whisper. My Clara, my wife. Violet turned then, and he saw something flicker in her dark eyes. Fear, recognition, or maybe just the weight of coincidence too heavy to bear. That's impossible, is it? Wyatt took a step closer, studying her face in the morning light. A woman named Clara Rose teaches her granddaughter to cook and garden. That granddaughter grows up, marries a man who dies in a mining accident, and somehow finds her way to the ranch of another man whose wife was also named Clara Rose. A woman who cooked exactly like you do, who tended this garden like you seem to know it, who loved roses and herbs and making everything just right. You're scaring me, Violet whispered, but she didn't move away. I'm scaring myself. Wyatt reached out, his fingers hovering inches from her cheek. Yesterday, when I tasted your stew, it was like Clara was standing right here beside me. And that pie, the apple pie you made, it tastes exactly like the one she used to make for my birthday. Down to the crust pattern, the way you crimped the edges. People can have similar recipes, Violet said, but her voice lacked conviction. Can they have the same dreams? Wyatt's hand dropped to his side. Because I dreamed about you last night. Dreamed Clara was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't make out the words. When I woke up, I could smell roses in my room. Roses, like the ones Clara used to grow. Violet's face had gone pale. I dreamed too, she admitted in a voice so soft he had to lean closer to hear. Dreamed about a woman with golden hair and the kindest eyes. She was standing in this kitchen, and she seemed worried, like she was trying to tell me something important. What did she look like? Wyatt's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Beautiful. Sad. She kept pointing to you. Then to Sadie, then to herself. Like she was trying to connect us somehow. Violet's eyes filled with tears. I woke up knowing exactly how to make bread the way you'd like it. How to season the coffee just right. I knew where everything was. In your kitchen like I'd lived here my whole life. They stood in the garden, surrounded by Clara's roses and herbs, the morning sun casting long shadows between them. Wyatt felt as if he were standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into something vast and unknowable. There's something else, Violet said, her voice barely audible. Something I haven't told you. What? She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. Her hands shook as she held it out to him. This is my grandmother. The Clara Rose who taught me everything I know. Wyatt took the photograph, and his knees nearly buckled. The woman in the picture had golden hair and kind eyes, a gentle smile and laugh lines around her mouth. She was younger than as Clara had been when she died, but the resemblance was unmistakable that it was his wife's face, 20 years younger, smiling up at him from a photograph that should have been impossible. Wyatt stared at the photograph until his eyes burned, willing the image to change, to become someone else, anyone else. But the face looking back at him remained stubbornly, impossibly familiar. Clara's eyes, Clara's smile, Clara's delicate hands folded in her lap. The only difference was the youth in her features, the absence of the fine lines that had appeared around her eyes during their years together. This can't be right, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Clara never mentioned having a granddaughter, never talked about Missouri relatives. Maybe she didn't know. Violet's words came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for hours. My grandmother died when I was 16. She was secretive about her past. Said some stories were too painful to tell. What stories? Violet looked away, her gaze fixed on the rose bushes that seemed to lean toward her like old friends. She told me she'd loved a man once, back in Wyoming. Said she'd lost him to circumstances beyond her control. Never married, never had children of her own, except she raised my mother after her sister died. Wyatt's mind raced through the timeline. Clara had been 17 when she'd answered his advertisement for a mail-order bride. She'd mentioned a sister back east, but claimed she had no other family. What if there had been more to her story? What if she'd been running from something or someone? Your grandmother raised your mother? He asked, trying to piece together the impossible puzzle. Yes, Mama was her sister's child. When the fever took my aunt, Grandmother Clara stepped in. She was everything to us. Taught me to cook, to sew, to read the weather and the seasons. Said a woman needed to know how to make a home anywhere, because life had a way of changing when you least expected it. The words hit Wyatt like physical blows. Those were Clara's words, her philosophy, spoken in the exact cadence she'd used when teaching him to appreciate the small rituals that made a house a home. Sadie, he called to the little girl, who was chasing a butterfly through the garden. Come here, sweetheart. The child approached cautiously, her amber eyes darting between her mother and Wyatt. Yes, sir. Tell me about your great-grandmother, the one who taught your mama to cook. Sadie's face lit up with the special glow children reserved for their most treasured memories. Great-grandmama Clara. She was magical. She could make flowers grow just by singing to them, and she always smelled like roses and vanilla. She told the best stories about cowboys and wild horses. What kind of stories? Wyatt's heart was beating so hard he could barely breathe. About a cowboy who lived on a big ranch with mountains all around. She said he was the handsomest man in all of Wyoming, with eyes like storm clouds and hands that could gentle the wildest horse. She said she loved him more than all the stars in the sky. The description was too specific, too accurate. Wyatt's eyes were indeed the color of storm clouds, and Clara had always teased him about his way with horses. But how could a woman in Missouri know such intimate details about his appearance? Did she say anything else about this cowboy? Violet asked, her voice tight with emotion. She said she had to leave him behind, but that someday, when the time was right, love would find a way to bring them back together. She said love was stronger than death, stronger than time, stronger than anything that tried to keep two souls apart. Wyatt felt the world spinning around him. He gripped the photograph, tighter, as if it could anchor him to reality. Violet, I need to know exactly when your grandmother died. October 15th, 1887. The date came out without hesitation. I remember because it was the day before my 16th birthday. She held on just long enough to give me her recipe book and tell me. She stopped, her face paling to the color of parchment. Tell you what, she said I needed to find my way to Wyoming someday. Said there was a man there who would need me, who would be lost without someone to care for him. She made me promise to go west when the time was right, to find the Double C Ranch, and Violet's voice broke. And she said I'd know him because he'd taste my cooking and remember love. Wyatt's blood turned to ice. October 15th, 1887. The same day Clara had died in his arms, fever burning through her like wildfire. She'd been delirious in those final hours, talking about Missouri, about a sister she'd never mentioned, about promises she'd never been able to keep. She died the same day, he said numbly. My Clara died the same day as your grandmother. That's impossible. But Violet's protest lacked conviction. They both knew they were standing in the middle of something impossible, something that defied every law of nature they understood. Is it? Wyatt looked around the garden, at the roses blooming out of season, at the herbs that seemed to grow more vibrant with each passing hour. Look around you, Violet. Look at what's happening here. She followed his gaze, and he saw the moment she truly noticed. The garden was transforming before their eyes. Plants that had been withered and dying yesterday were now lush and green. The rose bushes were heavy with blooms that shouldn't have been possible in October. Even the vegetables looked healthier, more abundant. It's like the garden knows you're here, Wyatt said softly. Like it's been waiting for you. That's not possible, Violet whispered, but her hands were trembling as she reached out to touch a perfect red rose. Plants they don't remember. People, don't they? Wyatt moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. Clara used to say that everything in nature has memory, that love leaves an imprint on the world, and sometimes, if the need is great enough, that imprint can call across time and space. You're talking about ghost stories, Violet said, but her voice was uncertain. Am I? Or am I talking about love? So strong it refuses to be buried. Wyatt reached out, his fingers brushing hers where they touched the rose. The moment their skin made contact, he felt it. A jolt of recognition so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. Images flooded his mind. Clara as a young woman, standing in this very garden, but somehow different, older. A life unlived, a love unfulfilled. A promise made in dying breath that somehow, some way, she would find a way to care for him when he needed it most. I see her, Violet gasped, her eyes wide with shock. I see her in my mind. She's showing me things. Memories. Your wedding day, the first time you kissed her, the way you used to hold her when she was afraid during thunderstorms. What else? Wyatt's voice was barely a whisper. She's showing me the baby. The daughter you lost with her. How she was going to name her. Sadie, after her great-grandmother. Violet's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Wyatt. She's been planning this for 2 years, waiting for the right moment to send me to you. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. They'd lost their daughter the same day Clara died, her body unable to fight the fever while carrying their child. He'd never told anyone what they'd planned to name her. She sent you, he said, understanding flooding through him like sunrise after the longest night. Somehow, she found a way to send you to me. To us. But why? Violet asked, tears streaming down her face. Why would she do that? Wyatt looked at little Sadie, who was now sitting quietly in the garden, surrounded by butterflies that seemed drawn to her presence. The child Clara had always wanted, the family she'd dreamed of, the love she'd been unable to give. Because, he said, his voice breaking with emotion, she knew I'd need someone to teach me how to live again. And she knew Sadie would need a father who understood what it meant to lose everything and still believe in love. The sound of hoofbeats thundering across the prairie shattered the morning's fragile peace like glass hitting stone. Wyatt's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip as he counted the riders. 6 men, hard-faced and travel-worn, kicking up dust clouds that hung in the still air like smoke signals of trouble. "Get inside," he told Violet, his voice sharp with authority. "Take Sadie and lock the door." But Violet had gone rigid beside him, her face draining of color as she watched the approaching riders. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, no. Not here. Not now. You know them." Wyatt's eyes never left the horseman, but he could feel the terror radiating from Violet like heat from a forge. "The one in front, that's Grayson Sawyer. My husband's brother." Her voice cracked on the words. "He's been hunting us since the funeral." Wyatt's blood chilled. A man didn't hunt his dead brother's wife and child unless his intentions were darker than a moonless night. "What does he want?" "Sadie." Violet's hands shook as she pulled her daughter close. "He claims she's his responsibility now. Says a child needs a man's guidance, not a woman's weak hand." "Over my dead body," Wyatt growled. But even as he spoke, he was calculating odds. 6 against 1, and him with a woman and child to protect. Not impossible, but far from favorable. The riders pulled up in a cloud of dust and jingling spurs. Grayson Sawyer was a big man with mean eyes and the kind of smile that never reached above his mouth. The 5 men flanking him had the look of hired guns, the sort who'd kill a man for the price of a bottle of whiskey. Well, Grayson drawled, pushing his hat back on his head. Little Violet's found herself a protector. "Mighty fine spread you got here, mister. Shame it'd be such a shame if something happened to it." "State your business," Wyatt said coldly, his hand resting casually on his gun grip. "Then get off my land. My business is with my sister-in-law and my niece. Family matters, you understand." Grayson's eyes fixed on Sadie, who was hiding behind her mother's skirts. "Child needs to come home where she belongs." "I'm not your sister-in-law," Violet said, finding her voice despite the tremor in it. "Thomas is dead. Whatever claim you think you have died with him. Did it now?" Grayson's smile turned predatory. "See, that's where you're wrong, sweetheart. Thomas owed me money. Considerable money. And since he can't pay, that debt falls to his family." "What debt?" Violet stepped forward, anger overriding fear. "Thomas never borrowed from you. He hated you, said you were poison to everything you touched. Gambling debts," Grayson said smoothly. "Poker games, horse races, all sorts of foolishness. Man gets desperate when his mind stops producing, starts making bad choices. I got papers to prove it." Wyatt knew a lie when he heard one, but he also knew that papers could be forged, judges could be bought, and the law wasn't always just. "How much?" he asked quietly. $2,000. Plus interest. Grayson's grin widened. "Of course, I'm willing to settle for the girl. She'll work off her daddy's debt, and I'll make sure she's properly raised, turned into a useful woman." The threat in his words made Wyatt's trigger finger itch. He'd seen what men like Grayson did to children in their care. Worked them like slaves, beat them into submission, or worse. "The answer's no. Wasn't asking you, stranger." Grayson's hand moved to his own gun. "This is family business." "She's family now," Wyatt said, the words coming out before he'd consciously decided to speak them. "Violet's my wife. Sadie's my daughter. That makes your business my business." The lie hung in the air like a challenge. Violet's sharp intake of breath was the only sound besides the wind whistling through the ranch buildings. "Is that so?" Grayson's eyes narrowed. "Mighty quick courtship, wasn't it? Woman's been widowed. Less than a year. When you know, Wyatt said evenly. "Now get off my land before I decide you're trespassing." "You got papers proving this marriage," one of Grayson's men called out. "Or are you just keeping her as a convenience?" Heat flooded Wyatt's face, but before he could respond, Violet stepped forward. "We were married yesterday," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "By Pastor Coleman in town. You can check the church records if you doubt it." The lie was smooth, practiced, and Wyatt realized this wasn't the first time Violet had been forced to think quickly to protect herself and her daughter. How many times had she faced men like Grayson, who saw a woman alone as easy prey? "Well, ain't that convenient?" Grayson snarled. "But it don't matter none. Debt's still debt. And I got legal papers saying that child belongs to me now. Let's see them, Wyatt demanded. Grayson reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. Even from a distance, Wyatt could see the official-looking seals and signatures. Forged or not, it would carry weight with any sheriff or judge who didn't know the truth. This here's a custody order, Grayson said, holding up the paper. Signed by Judge Harrison himself. Says little Sadie comes with me, willing or not. Harrison's in my pocket, he continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. So's the sheriff. You try to fight this legal-like, and you'll find yourself facing charges for harboring a fugitive child. Wyatt's mind raced. Legal channels were closed to them, and fighting 6 armed men would likely end with all of them dead. But there was another way, a dangerous gamble that might buy them time. What if I paid the debt, he asked. $2,000. Grayson laughed. You got that kind of money laying around, rancher? I might. Wyatt's voice was carefully neutral. But I need to see proof of the debt first. Real proof, not just your word. You calling me a liar? Grayson's hand moved to his gun. I'm calling you a man who might be mistaken about the amount, Wyatt replied smoothly. Any businessman knows you don't pay a debt without proper documentation. He was stalling, hoping inspiration would strike, when he felt Violet's hand slip into his. Her fingers were cold but steady, and when he looked down, he saw something had changed in her eyes. The fear was still there, but it was tempered now by something else, determination. There's something else you should know, Grayson, Violet said, her voice carrying across the yard like a bell. Before Thomas died, he told me about the mine, about what you two were really doing down there. Grayson went very still. What are you talking about? The silver, or you've been stealing from the Henderson claim? The assay reports you've been falsifying. The way you've been selling, or under fake names in 3 different towns. Violet's voice grew stronger with each word. Thomas kept records. Names, dates, amounts. Everything you need to put you in prison for theft and fraud. You're lying, Grayson said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Then why are you so worried? Violet pulled a small leather journal from her apron pocket. This is Thomas's journal. Every illegal transaction, every bribe, every threat you made to keep him quiet. I've been saving it for the right moment. Wyatt felt a surge of admiration for the woman beside him. Even terrified, even facing down 6 armed men, she was fighting back with the only weapon she had, truth and courage. You give me that book, Grayson snarled, or I'll take it from your cold, dead hands. You can try, Wyatt said, his voice deadly quiet. But you'll have to go through me first. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. 6 guns against 1, but Wyatt had the advantage of position and desperation. More importantly, he had something worth fighting for. Then little Sadie stepped out from behind her mother's skirts, looked up at Grayson with those amber eyes, and said in a voice that carried the weight of prophecy, "You can't have me. My angel won't let you." The words hung in the autumn air like a prayer made manifest. Sadie stood between the armed men and her family, small and fearless, her amber eyes fixed on something beyond the visible world. A strange calm settled over the ranch yard, as if the very wind was holding its breath. What angel, sweetheart? Grayson sneered, but his voice carried a tremor that betrayed his unease. The pretty lady with golden hair, Sadie said matter-of-factly. She's standing right behind Papa Wyatt. She says you can't take me because I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Wyatt felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. Behind him, Violet made a soft sound, half gasp, half sob. But it was the horses that told the real story. 6 horses, trained for gunfights and violence, suddenly began to dance and snort with nervous energy, their eyes rolling white as they stared at the empty space behind Wyatt. Enough of this nonsense, Grayson snarled, but his own mount was sidling. Away from Wyatt, ears pinned back in animal fear. Grab the child. The nearest gunman spurred his horse forward, reaching down to snatch Sadie from the ground. But as his hand closed around her arm, the most extraordinary thing happened. The wind rose from nowhere, fierce and sudden, carrying with it the scent of roses so strong it was like breathing pure perfume. The man's horse reared, striking the air with iron-shod hooves, and threw its rider hard into the dirt. The other horses followed suit, bucking and spinning in a panic that had their riders fighting just to stay mounted. In the chaos, Wyatt saw his chance. His colt cleared leather. smooth as silk, the barrel finding Grayson's chest before the man could blink. "I reckon that's enough," Wyatt said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd faced down death more times than he cared to count. "You can't take us all," Grayson gasped, struggling to control his terrified horse. "Maybe not," Wyatt agreed. "But I'll take you first, and that's a promise. Now, I suggest you and your boys ride out while you still can." "This ain't over," Grayson spat, but he was already wheeling his horse around. "That journal won't protect you forever. I got friends in low places, and money talks louder than truth." "Perhaps," said a new voice from the direction of the main road. "But justice talks loudest of all." Everyone turned to see a man approaching, on a fine bay horse, tall, silver-haired, wearing a badge that caught the morning sun. Sheriff Hunter Finley of Cheyenne, a man whose reputation for fairness and courage stretched across 3 territories. "Sheriff," Grayson said, his face going pale, "this is just a family matter. Nothing that concerns the law. Is that so?" "Sheriff." Finley dismounted with the easy grace of a man comfortable in the saddle. "Because I've got some interesting telegraph messages from Missouri. Seems there's been some questions about mining claims and forged documents. Amazing how news travels when there's federal marshals involved." Wyatt kept his gun trained on Grayson while processing this new development. Federal marshals meant serious charges, the kind that could put a man away for decades. "I got nothing to do with any federal matters," Grayson protested, but sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool air. "No? Then you won't mind coming back to town with me to answer some questions." Sheriff Finley's hand rested casually on his own weapon. "Of course, if you'd rather run, that's your choice. But I should mention that Judge Harrison had a sudden attack of conscience yesterday. Seems he's been talking to federal investigators about certain bribes and falsified court documents." The color drained completely from Grayson's face. Without his corrupt judge in his pocket, he was just another wanted man with nowhere to hide. "This is a setup," he snarled, his eyes wild with desperation. "You're all in on it." "No setup," Sheriff Finley said calmly. "Just justice catching up with a man who thought he was above the law. Now, you can come peaceful, or we can do this the hard way." For a moment, Wyatt thought Grayson might try to fight. The man's hand twitched toward his gun, and his hired killers tensed in their saddles. But then little Sadie spoke again, her voice carrying with otherworldly certainty. "The angel says you should go now, before the bad things you've done catch up with you forever." This time, even Grayson's hardened men couldn't hide their unease. One by one, they began backing their horses away, unwilling to face whatever supernatural force seemed to be protecting the ranch. "This ain't over," Grayson repeated, but his voice broke on the words. He was a beaten man, and everyone knew it. "Yes, it is," Violet said, stepping forward with Thomas's journal clutched in her hands. "Sheriff, this contains evidence of every illegal thing Grayson Sawyer has done for the past 3 years. Names, dates, amounts, everything you need to put him away for good." Sheriff Finley accepted the journal with a nod of thanks. "Ma'am, I believe this makes you and your daughter free and clear of any claims this man might have had." "We're grateful, Sheriff," Wyatt said, finally holstering his weapon. "More grateful than words can say." As the sheriff led Grayson and his men away in shackles, Wyatt turned to find Violet watching him with tears streaming down her face. In her arms, Sadie had finally allowed exhaustion to claim her, sleeping peacefully despite the morning's violence. "It's over," Violet whispered. "It's really over." "Yes," Wyatt agreed, pulling both of them into his arms. "But something else is just beginning." They stood together in the golden morning light, 3 souls who'd found each other across impossible odds. Around them, the garden bloomed with renewed life, and the scent of roses filled the air like a benediction. "Mama," Sadie mumbled sleepily. "The pretty angel lady says to tell Papa Wyatt that love never really dies. It just finds new ways to bloom." Wyatt looked down at the child in his arms, the daughter Clara had always wanted him to have, brought to him by the woman Clara had somehow sent to heal his broken heart. In that moment, he understood that some love was indeed stronger than death, stronger than time, stronger than anything that tried to keep kindred souls apart. "Tell the angel lady we understand," he said softly, "and tell her thank you." "She says you're welcome," Sadie replied with the casual acceptance of childhood. And she says the roses will bloom every year now because love has come home. That evening, as they sat down to dinner as a family for the first time, Wyatt tasted Violet's apple pie and smiled. It was perfect, exactly like Clara's, but somehow uniquely Violet's too. A bridge between past and future, between what was lost and what could be found again. To second chances, he said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. To love that finds a way, Violet replied, her eyes shining with happiness. And somewhere in the garden, the roses bloomed out of season, their petals catching the last light of day like promises made manifest in a world where miracles still happen to those brave enough to believe in them. Well, folks, if that don't prove that love can conquer all, I don't know what will. Sometimes the heart knows what the mind can't understand, and sometimes the good Lord works in ways more mysterious than a midnight prayer. Like and share this tale if it touched your heart. And remember, true love always finds a way home. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from today, partners. Until next time, may your trails be smooth and your hearts be full.